If you like what I do, consider supporting me on Ko-fi or Patreon. Links in the description.
Open! Or don't. Ugh, are you even turned on? Wait, no, that sounded wrong.
Phrasing.
I am exactly the audience Yars Rising was made for. It's a Metroidvania developed by WayForward, one of my favorite developers, containing magical girl elements about an old Atari game I loved as a kid. Yes, I am that old. I stayed up many a night playing Yars Revenge on my uncle's 2600. And as for the magical girl thing, I mean, come on. Sailor Moon brought forth a certain type of awakening in many young boys of the time, especially for a 6-year-old guru. If you think that's weird, it could have been way weirder. Samurai Pizza Cats came on before Sailor Moon, and that could have caused a very different awakening. Anyway, I'll give you a quick rundown of Yars Revenge. It was released in 1982 and went on to be the best-selling Atari game that wasn't an arcade port. The game was programmed by Howard Scott Warsaw, who has the distinct honor of programming Atari's greatest game and its worst game. But let's not taint the man's venerable name. He only had 5 weeks to make E.T., and E.T. was only the straw that broke the camel's back that was the video game Crash of '83. The real progenitor of the video game Crash of '83 was the super Pac-Man port, which encapsulated everything wrong with the industry at the time. Poor quality, zero standards, and overproduction. They produced more Pac-Man 2600 cartridges than there were 2600 sold. But I digress. Needless to say, I was very excited to see one of my childhood favorites getting revamped. Yes, I know Yars exists, but that didn't do it for me. Now, Yars Rising, this does it for me. It has that WayForward charm and style I've grown to love, and it brings back the old school look and feel of the original Yars in the game's hacking mechanic. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I should probably tell you what Yars Rising is even about. You play as Emi Yar Kimura, a hacker hired by a mysterious client to infiltrate the shadowy Kotek Corporation. With the help of her hacker buds, one of which is absolutely insufferable.
On God? I don't know, that's pretty sus.
Emi will sneak and hack her way into the company's mainframe or servers or whatever. Unfortunately, she gets caught before she can do any real damage. She easily escapes her captors and hacks a console that sorta alters her DNA, allowing her to fire energy from her hands, which comes in handy considering all the laser firing robots lurking about. Now, her goal is to escape the building before anything bad happens to her. But the stuff she sees on her way out soon entrenches her in an adventure of galactic proportions. That's a solid setup for me. But does Yars Rising soar to new heights? Or is it just another cheap throwback cash grab banking on my nostalgia?
Combat.
Combat is as bare bones as it gets in Yars Rising. Emi can shoot colorful energy blasts and pink missiles forward, and that's it. She doesn't even have a parry or dodge roll with iframes. You're basically going back to the Stone Age when it comes to Yars combat. Don't believe me? Emi's missiles are limited to item pickups from enemy and environmental object drops like this were Wonder Boy, and she can't shoot in multiple directions like this were frickin' Mega Man, despite having a seemingly healthy set of shoulders. Most of the game's bosses would be absolute cakewalks if Emi could just angle her arms a bit. Well, more of a cakewalk than they already are. There aren't a lot of bosses in this game to test you, and the ones that are here are pretty basic with maybe like 2 or 3 moves tops. I don't think I died to a single boss except for the last 2, and the penultimate boss only got me because I didn't read the directions at the bottom of the screen. It's always great when boss fights throw new mechanics at you without explaining anything. My biggest gripe with the bosses is that outside of the first boss, you didn't even utilize the game's most unique skill, hacking. I'll get into hacking much later, but I really just think hacking was underutilized in boss encounters. It really should have been more prevalent as a combat mechanic. And that's really all I have to say about combat in Yars Rising. It's an old-fashioned run and gun through and through with very little challenge and very little options. And 0 shoulder mobility.
Abilities, platforming.
Yars Rising continues its archaic approach to game design by making its abilities and platforming equally as bland as its combat. Let's start with the abilities. Emmy's standard attack needs to be unlocked, so that's technically an ability. Then she gets tried and true moves in her wall jump, air dash, and double jump. By the way, her double jump costs a resource to use. The same resource you need to use on other abilities, and that should be a crime. I mentioned earlier that Emmy's missiles are limited to item pickups. These same pickups, called Tryons, are used for Emmy's double jump and another one of her more unique abilities, the Firefly drone, which controls a lot like Ness's PK Thunder in Smash Bros. So that's cool. What's not cool is how they all share the same resource, especially when you can only hold 10 Tryons at a time, and Tryons are more rare drops compared to their pink healing counterparts. Your Tryon bank and Tryon drops can be altered later on, but I'll touch on that method in the progression section. Regardless, having this limited resource necessary to use 3 different moves, 2 of which are necessary for platforming, kinda sucks. Emmy has 2 more unique abilities, the ability to walk on water and the Tryonic Nibble, which destroys certain barriers. The Tryonic Nibble is also an attack, but you have to be grounded and stay completely still to use it, so hitting anything with it required too much foresight and required you to be right up on the enemy to hit them with it. Why use that when I could, I don't know, shoot enemies from clear across the other side of the room? I wanted to like the Tryonic Nibble, but there was no advantage to using it. Rarely an enemy would have a shield around them that forced you to use it to destroy that shield, but I would have liked to have seen other uses for the move. When it comes to platforming, again, Yars Rising keeps it pretty bland. Level design is boxy, and there's really nothing here to test your platforming chops. It's mostly just basic jumping around. There will be a butt ton of lasers you'll need to dodge though.
Hope there's no more lasers ahead.
And the game has a stealth mechanic that I just didn't use at all. And I ain't even mad about it because I hate stealth. Here's a montage of me giving 0 fucks about stealth and instead being a complete menace. They give you a stealth button, a button to hold down so you can tiptoe, but there's no reason to use it. As you can clearly see, I just ran and danced behind jabronis. Their AI is not very sophisticated, but if they do catch you, you'll lose 40% of your health and get sent back to the beginning of the area. So, don't get caught. And that's it for this section. Emmy does get some interesting abilities, but the bulk of her moves you've seen before. And none are used in a particularly interesting way, aside from the Firefly drone activating platforms. Platforming's pretty basic, and the stealth mechanic is kinda pointless to be honest.
Progression.
Surprise, surprise! There's not a whole lot to go over here. Yars Rising is very much a Metroid-like in that it has no leveling system, gear, or skill tree. Heck, it doesn't even have any currency or any shops. There's not even any NPCs to interact with outside of cutscenes. Yars Rising does, however, have an interesting player modification system that can lead to some nice player expression. What you're looking at on the screen, that's your modification system. It's a giant Yar board you play Tetris on, with each of the blocks being a different modification. Mods are pretty standard, ranging from increasing health to increasing attack damage to adding perks to your hacking abilities. I'll get into the hacking minigame in the exploration section. There are some interesting mods that affect exploration, and I thought these were awesome. I don't want to spoil all these cooler mods, so I'll just give one example. There's a mod you can find that increases the height of Emmy's double jump, allowing you to reach an optional biohack you couldn't normally reach. Oh yeah, biohacking is what upgrading Emmy is called. You find a console, hack it, and get new abilities or these blocks to place on your Yar board. This Yar board was a cool idea, but I eventually got tired of it. I hated finding a new mod and then having to reconfigure everything just to jimmy it in. At some point, I just stopped caring. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if the interface had some quality of life upgrades. It's tough to explain, but swapping mods and finding certain mods in the menu just wasn't optimal. Little things like seeing a highlighted mod and a chosen mod side by side would have been helpful. That's it for progression. Being a Metroid-like, Yars Rising lacks the light RPG elements that come with the Vania suffix. obviously that's not an issue. What is an issue is how empty this world feels due to a lack of NPCs and shops. None of these things are necessary for an MV, but for such a high energy game to have such an unlived in world feels odd. And even though the Yarboard / biohack progression system is neat, its novelty wears thin about midway through the game.
Exploration.
Again, we have yet another adequate aspect in Yars Rising. That is to say, exploration is okay. It isn't bad, but it's definitely nothing to write home about. Level design is pretty blocky, and the biomes all seem to run together, which makes sense because the great majority of the game takes place within the Kotek office building. You do visit a couple of other more diverse settings, but I'll leave those for you to discover. Now, I'm not saying the office environments are all the exact same, just samey. Sections do their best to stick out, and largely they do a good job making some areas look like a lab while others look like a legit office with cubicles. But it's really not enough to make any particular section stick out. And that's pretty much the best way to sum up Yars Rising's world. It is aggressively forgettable. Now, here's the $1,000,000 question. Is exploration at least rewarding? And the answer is, not really.
They're getting stingy with the prizes.
The main motivators that push you to explore Emmy's world are related to its atmosphere, which I'll discuss in the next section. There's really nothing exciting to find in your exploits. Biomes don't really connect in any interesting way because it's just an office building. Nor are biomes very interesting for the same reason. And the only collectibles are biohack mods. And when you get fed up with the Yarboard, finding these mods becomes far less enticing. Another issue I had was how linear Yars Rising was. According to my in-game save file, I was 46% of the way through the game before I was given any opportunity to explore the world outside of a predetermined path. That's kind of bonkers for an MV. And once the game finally releases the reins, the most I could do with my newly found exploratory agency was backtrack to areas that held biohack mods. The things I was completely sick of at that point. Now, that's not to say I didn't find the late game biohacks to be cool. It wasn't until I found some of these more interesting mods that I started engaging with the Yars board again. Alright, I feel like I've been bitching this whole time, but I swear Yars has some great qualities. For instance, its hacking minigame, the thing you have to do to unlock doors, activate elevators, and obtain biohacks. Hacking was my favorite thing to do in this game. Like I said in the intro, I was a huge fan of Yars Revenge back in the 80s. So this is a testament to how well Way Forward nailed that original game's feel. It's not one for one though. In fact, I'd say Way Forward improved it. Turning the classic Yars formula into quick micro games was perfect because each of these hacking moments came with some serious WarioWare vibes. There were so many different scenarios to do and overcome while hacking, you never knew what to expect. This was ultimately fine and a lot of fun, but there were times I didn't know what to do in the minigame and would die while reading the on-screen instructions. It's not a big deal and usually got a laugh out of me, but it would have been nice to read the instructions before shit was flying all over the screen. Required reading on media res is never ideal. I'll finish our exploration discussion with the in-game map and fast travel. The map is perfectly serviceable. You can't lay down any markers, but you also don't need to. I'd prefer to lay down markers myself so it looks like I'm good at video games, but Yars Rising's method works well. The map fills in as you go, and there are clear indicators on where you can and cannot go, with exits either being open white lines or a stop sign that becomes open white lines after you get an upgrade. It's all very dummy-proof. The game even highlights biohack stations and indicates whether you've completed them or not. And as for fast travel, it's an office building, so you use elevators. It's a simple and easy waypoint system that I thought worked. That's it for exploration. It's painfully average with samey biomes, strict linearity in its first half, and very little collectibles. But the hacking minigame was pretty awesome.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
Finally, we've come to Yars Rising's best quality, its atmosphere. Way Forward has always been flamboyant, flashy, and stylistic with their releases, and Yars Rising is no different. I'm not one for 2.5D MVs, but Way Forward did a great job here. The characters and enemies look natural against the environments they're in, and the environments look smooth and pleasing to my eyeballs. You could argue the environments are kind of generic, and I'd agree with you, but at least their textures don't make my eyes cross like some 2.5D games. And I kinda dig its retro-futuristic vibe. Speaking of retro-futuristic, that's the first thing that comes to mind if I were to describe to you Yars' soundtrack. Well, Brilliant actually comes to mind first, but then I'd tell you it's retro-futuristic. Imagine modern synthwave meets disco and arcade noises. That's basically this game's OST in a nutshell. Then add on some melodic vocals, and you got yourself a hit. I love River City Girls, and to see Megan McDuffie and Christina V contributing their talents to Yars just feels right. There are a lot of contributors on this excellent soundtrack, but I think Tommy Pedrini is a real standout. Allow yourself a moment to drink in this game's amazing tunes.
How do you do it? I can't explain. Human connection, hacking my brain. You've got my head all rewired inside with a switch right in my mind. I have tried all
Other excellent components that add to Yars' atmosphere are its voice acting and humor. I think Emmy's VA, Jenny Yokobori, did an excellent job adding personality to the character, especially with all the goofy quips and meta jabs.
I destroyed one of those expensive-looking Kotek robots. They must love you over there. Actually, they're pretty annoyed with, oh, you were being sarcastic.
And like John McClane when he was trying to survive in Nakatomi Plaza, Emmy talks to herself as she tries to survive Kotek's HQ.
Yes, I'd like to buy 500 lasers, sir.
Do you have a coupon for that, ma'am?
You bet I do.
I don't know. I'm just a sucker for writing like this. I'm not gonna say every wisecrack Emmy belts is a banger, but there are way more hits than misses here. And her constant banter adds much to her charm.
I'm a little lost. Can you direct me to the bathroom?
Yeah. So head past the kill button lasers, then take a left at the first alien bugs, and then
I know I've been glazing this game's atmosphere, but it's not perfect. I mentioned it earlier, but I think one of Yars' biggest failings is how unlived in its world feels. There are 0 NPCs to interact with, and no characters at all in any of the backgrounds. It's just Emmy, her gang, and maybe a half dozen other characters, and that's it. A lack of characters is perfectly fine in an MV revolving around the feeling of isolation, but that's not Yars. Yars is high energy with spunky and quirky characters feeding off each other to create a light and funny atmosphere. It's odd feeling all alone in this game, and this feeling is exacerbated when you see 0 people in Emmy's apartment complex or throughout the entire city. I get there's an event going on, so it makes sense that the city is evacuated, but it would have done wonders to have seen other people in chaos, stampeding and screaming, something to show that this world is alive. This could have even been shown in one of those comic book panel cutscenes the game likes to use. But this game does nothing to convey that other people exist in this world once the game starts proper. It's just Emmy and some of her talking heads for friends roaming this land all on their lonesome. It's disorienting for a game with such high energy. The narrative's not much to talk about. Emmy's been hired to hack Kotek, that gets thwarted, so she has to escape, but then stakes increase, now she has to save a couple of worlds. Also, there's a twist that really doesn't make any sense, but whatever. The narrative's just an ends to a means. Don't get too caught up about it. Just laugh at Emmy's quips and you'll be fine.
What's the point of lighting it on fire? It's already super deadly.
It looks cooler that way.
Can't disagree with that.
That's it for this section. Atmosphere is definitely Yars' strong suit with its incredible soundtrack, excellent voice work, and silly sense of humor. Though it has a glaring weakness with how dead its world feels. And its narrative, well, it certainly has one, I can tell you that much.
Final thoughts and score.
Yars Rising attempts to revive an arcade classic with some modern twists, but falls short in a few crucial areas. While nostalgia is strong and the hacking minigames bring fresh life to the classic Yars formula, the combat system feels severely outdated. Emmy's ho-hum abilities and inexplicable arthritis in her shoulders preventing her from attacking anywhere but straight in front of her, combined with the lack of modern, almost genre-standard essential mechanics like dodge rolls, make combat overly simplistic. Boss fights are underwhelming, with basic attack patterns and minimal challenge. The game's platforming and exploration also suffer from a lack of variety and creativity, leading to a repetitive experience despite a few cool abilities like the Firefly drone. On the positive side, Yars Rising boasts a fantastic atmosphere, vibrant retro-futuristic art, and an incredible soundtrack that keeps the energy high. The humor and voice acting add charm, with Emmy's witty quips providing levity during gameplay. However, the world feels strangely empty, lacking any sense of life or urgency, which is disorienting for an energetic game. The lack of NPCs, side quests, currency, and shops makes the world feel flat, detracting from an otherwise engaging atmosphere. Yars Rising has its moments of fun, especially for fans of the original Yars Revenge, but its outdated combat mechanics and lack of world building keep it from reaching its full potential. I award Yars Rising a 6.5 out of 10.
Tier placement.
Yars Rising is very ironic. It improved a 40-plus-year-old game's shoot-'em-up formula by modernizing it with a micro-games approach, yet it took the more modern MV formula that's been steadily improving since the mid-2010s and sent it back to the Stone Age with its minimalistic, almost phoned-in MV design effort. Yars Rising hacks its way into the C tier. I want to be clear, I personally liked Yars Rising. It reminds me a lot of Double Dragon Neon, another WayForward game with a similar goal of taking an old IP and breathing into it some new life. And the tactics for both games were similar too. Lovingly poke fun at the game's legacy, update gameplay for a modern audience, and do it all with a lot of style and great humor. I think what disappoints me most about Yars Rising is how it felt phoned in on the gameplay front. Like they just did the bare minimum to make it an MV and thought giving it a killer soundtrack would distract us enough into thinking it was better than it really was. But I still think what WayForward created has a ton of potential. I want to see WayForward continue with this franchise, and the best way to do that, in my humblest of humble opinions, is to add life to its world. Basically, I want some Persona-esque flair added to the mix. I really liked Emmy and found how she got tongue-tied around that guy she liked very endearing. I want to see Emmy interacting with people, and I want to see her come to terms with her new powers, using them to aid those around her or to save the day. The franchise can stay as a 2D side-scroller or even as a Metroidvania, but I can see a jump to 3D being beneficial as well, as long as the Yars Revenge hacking sequences retain their retro Atari charm. I guess what I'm saying is, I think Atari and WayForward have something here if they put more effort into it. This doesn't have to be Emmy's only adventure. I'd hate for the Yars franchise to end on such a hack job.